Hey, welcome to the show today, everybody. My name is Mike. I will be your host. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, your definitive leadership growth podcast. It's your opportunity to sit in the room and have conversations. Well, with me having conversations with awesome leaders, entrepreneurs, business people, managers from literally all over the world. I've got an absolutely outstanding guest this afternoon. I've got Lena M. Wilson. She's going to be joining us from Florida. She's a dynamic transition coach, multi-time author, CEO of Real Inspiration LLC. She's got over 25 years of corporate HR experience. She empowers individuals to seek their own clarity and find themselves in these transitions in life. So I am so excited to have her on the show today. Lena, welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Hi, everyone.
So I would love if you would share, like I said, when we were first talking, I'm like, you got 25 years of experience and then you got all this other stuff going on. I'm really excited to hear a little bit about your journey. Can you tell us, where you got started? How did you move into leadership and management? And then how did that transition to entrepreneurship? And obviously you're taking that and bringing it to the rest of the world of how can they transition in their businesses and in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So right after college, I was very fortunate. I was able to move up into a leadership position very quickly. So I worked at the time, I think it was called SunTrust Bank. I worked at the bank as a teller for about 5 years. And once I graduated, they offered me a management role, which I was just really grateful for because I was just not knowing much about management, right? How many times you're a high performer as an individual contributor, and then that is like, oh, why don't you be a manager, right? And you don't have any skills, you're not trained. But that's kind of what happened to me, right? I was grateful for the position, but I got zero training to be a leader. And at the time, I was able to lead about approximately 40 people at a time. And my role was really just to help them fill positions within different branches at the financial centers. I did that role for about a year. It was a very demanding role, and that's where I really learned the beginnings of being a manager. And I will say, honestly, I didn't even understand or grasp how to be a good leader in that role because I didn't get any training and I was so new to that level, right? And so
Sure.
after a year, I just decided, look, this role for the responsibility and all that came with it, I was highly underpaid. And so I made a decision to move to a different role. And at that point, that was my introduction into HR. I was offered a recruiting manager at another at that point was a telecommunications industry at a call center that had approximately 600 seats. And so I was the recruiting manager. Once again, I'm in a manager role. I have about 3 or 4 people reporting into me. And it was at this point that I started to become a little bit more invested in being a better manager. And that really, not that the organization invested in me, but I took the initiative to start learning how to be a good leader. What's the difference between a leader and a manager? And really started to focus there pretty highly. So kind of fast forward to that, I did recruiting for about 7 years. I continued to grow in my career. I then became an HR manager. And that was when I started to have more interface with a lot of different leaders and managers and started to really walk in the realm of coaching. So my coaching experience started really early in my HR career. And in doing that, that's where I was able to really see that a lot of managers who should be leaders, but they're not quite leaders yet because they just need some training. They need the support. They need the coaching. And so for me, it was very rewarding, even in an HR capacity, to be able to support managers and really help them to understand the difference between being a manager and a leader and develop that skill. And then if we kind of fast forward over, because it's about 32 years of corporate experience,
Sure.
I was then able to move into financial institution. I worked for one of the largest financial institutions here, and I was in employee relations for quite some time. And I continued coaching employees, coaching managers. And then the latter part of my career in corporate was really being an executive coach for mid-level managers and really helping them to kind of manage their teams, and really, how do they do all of the things that they're responsible for, but then still show up for themselves? That was one of the biggest gaps that I saw. And being a transition coach today was really birthed out of identifying the fact that in many cases, leaders struggle with change and transitions in organizations. They just don't always have the right skills. And there is a skill in terms of how do you manage change, how do you manage transitions, and then how do you lead people through change, and not just survive it, but how do you thrive through it? So today I am now in my own business, I am a transition coach where I help individuals, organizations, really navigate the complexities, the crossroads of, organizational and career and personal midlife changes.
There is so much good stuff in there, and I am so excited to have more of this conversation. You just an awesome background, and I'm sitting here taking notes. I always joke, and I share this openly with people. If I'm ever looking down, you catch me looking down, because I've been accused of people are like, you look a little disinterested. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to keep up. I'm just trying to keep up because it's awesome. So you and I could do like an 8-hour seminar show based off of just the pieces you shared here, and I would be excited to. So I'm just going to dive in and start.
Yeah.
One question: when you're moving in business, because I think a lot of people that tune into the show are movers and shakers in business, so to speak. Like they're in a place and they want something more. And one of the things that you said early on, you said, look, I was highly underpaid. How did you decide that? And was it the pay, or was it the opportunities that you were chasing more of for you?
So I will say I have always been an individual where being happy and fulfilled is always important to me. So while money is really significant, and we need, we want to be compensated well, I am not one of those individuals where I am so motivated by money that I want to chase the next thing that's going to pay me more. That is not how I am designed.
Sure.
But I realize that for the amount of work and stress that I was under in that role, that really, Mike, there was no amount of money that I would probably have been happy with to deal with sacrificing my well-being and my self-care. And so I do think when it comes to being a leader or whatever role you're in, you really have to think about, is this amount of money that I am making, is this really worth it? And am I able to show up as my best self? Because if your mental health, your physical, because I started to get physically sick, that role was really, really hard. If your mental health and your physical well-being starts impacted by a role, like that's a moment to pause and really process and assess, is this really worth the compensation I'm receiving for it? And for me, I just wasn't willing to sacrifice that.
I think that's fantastic, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I know that there's a bunch of other directions we can go. I just think that is something that a lot of people struggle with, because we get fixated on, well, I got to take care of the things. But I think that's really significant in the way that you put it. And you said, hey, look, there's these other pieces. Yes, there's significance to the compensation, but there are things that are way more valuable than that in growing, propelling yourself forward, those sorts of things. So I think what I'm hearing is sort of, it's not necessarily underpaid in the dollars, but for all of the other results and stuff that came with that, all the other things that are bombarding you. So I want people to hear that. And I always recommend, like, take notes as you're listening to these shows, because that's one of those things that I've struggled with in the past. So I kind of tuned in on that. The next thing that I would like to ask, and I'm curious, because you commented, you said, hey, I went from this role right into these management roles very, very quickly. And you said at one point over time that you really started to take, and we even talked about this just for a minute before the show. So often you'll get somebody that's really good at something and you say, man, we're going to promote them to a manager or a department head or whatever. And you said, look, I really started to take this on myself to grow. What are a couple of things that you did and that people could do, like from whatever seat they're in right now? If I'm saying, hey, look, I'm in this sales seat or marketing seat or a service seat somewhere, of some sort, but I really want to grow into management. What are some things that you did that you can recall, or man, this was really successful? I did these one or two things and I took it right away and grabbed a hold of it that you'd recommend to other people?
Yeah, so for me, one of the first things the first thing is having the desire to grow. That's the first thing. I think being a continuous learner is also a great trait to have. So that was something that worked well for me because I always wanted to learn. I always wanted to grow. And I quickly recognized that I was not going to get, unfortunately, the leadership and development that I needed at that particular employer that I was at the time. So I decided, first of all, that I was going to seek out a mentor, someone that I had admired. This was not someone in my organization. This was someone else that I had admired. I knew that they were, from my view, to be a very strong leader. And I really just started to spend more time with this individual and then really asked very directly, hey, I am trying to grow in my career as a leader. Would you be willing to mentor me and to help me in that line? So that was one of the first things, seeking out a mentor. And I want to digress for a second. When you seek out a mentor, I think it's always a good idea to find out how can you serve that individual as well, right? Because a mentor is someone who generally pours into you. But if you are intentionally seeking out a mentor and you're asking them to be your mentor, I always think it's a good practice to find ways. How can I serve this person before I even make that ask of them? So that when I make the ask, it's going to be a seamless yes, because you've already served them in some capacity. And that's exactly what I did. I had a relationship with this person. I had served them in different capacities. And so it was easy for me to ask them to be a mentor. The other thing I did was I watched a lot of leadership videos around. So Simon Sinek is one of the leadership. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's amazing. He's powerful.
Absolutely.
So I watched a lot of that. I also put myself in rooms with leaders and I made myself extremely uncomfortable. So you're like, Lena, why would you make yourself uncomfortable on purpose? Because that's where growth happens, right? Nothing extraordinary happens in your comfort zone. And so I was very intentional about, okay, what conference can I go to? What's happening in my area that I can go to? And let's be honest, sometimes I felt a little intimidated because the people in the room were so much more brilliant than I was in my estimation. But I wanted to be in those kinds of rooms because I knew that I would be sharpened to a level that will continue to fuel my growth. And so I would say a mentor, if you don't have one, put yourself in rooms and spaces that make you uncomfortable, but that would help you to learn and grow. Watch as many leadership videos that you can get a hold of. I mean, like now there's so many more. Podcasting wasn't really a thing back then. And then read a lot of books that would help you to develop habits, like Atomic Habits. Those are like one of my favorite books, right? Yep. Read leadership books and be open to feedback that you hear from your teams, because those are sometimes indicators of areas that you might need to focus on. And so I was always, as I was mentoring my team, I was always asking for feedback. And the feedback that they gave me, it wasn't criticism for me to take it personally. It was an opportunity for me to zone into those areas and figure out how can I grow in those areas. So I think even soliciting feedback from those that you lead is important to pay attention to that, because those are indicators of things that you can work on and focus on.
That is also, I love everything about that piece of the conversation. I literally love just everything that you shared. And I have a habit of doing this to recap, to make sure that I've got it. So you said you identified a mentor. And here's what I want other people to hear as well is she didn't just identify a mentor. And you said, hey, I identified him as a good leader, which is going to lead me to another question in a minute. But you were deliberate in asking the person. See, I think so often we try and have that sort of relationship and there's a give and take, and we try and work our ways into this relationship of, well, maybe they'll hopefully sort of coach me. But you deliberately said, hey, here's what I want. Here's what I'm able to provide to you. here's what I'm looking for. I think that is super powerful. You said, obviously having a desire to learn and grow, that comes before the seeking a mentor. Videos of leaders, books, all phenomenal. The putting yourself in rooms in uncomfortable situations, that took me back to a space probably 20 years ago, 2005, 2006. A mentor of my own, and I'm going to share this because I think it falls right in line with what you're saying. You said, hey, I was putting myself in rooms with people that you felt were brilliant or exceeded you. And what's amazing is you end up fitting at those tables. And I remember one of my mentors saying to me, and we were going to conferences and in the automotive industry. So they have a conference like every other weekend in the automotive industry, digital conference, leadership conference, management conference, stuff for franchises, stuff for independents, whatnot. And I remember on the way to the first like real conference where he took me to as a manager, Joe McCloskey, who he's longtime friend, longtime mentor of mine. I remember him saying to me and a couple of our other managers, he said, here's the thing. It's important when you guys get here, when we're having meals, like when we get together for lunch, when we get together for dinner, when we get together for these different things at these conferences, he says, I do not want you guys to sit together. It's important that you sit with people that you don't know.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, that's really uncomfortable. We came out here to hang out and have fun and learn and grow together. And he's like, no, I want you. He's like, I absolutely want you to sit with people you are not familiar with. And he says, if you feel like you can contribute. But if you don't necessarily feel like you're contributing something to the conversation, take it as an opportunity to learn and meet people and listen to what they have to contribute to the conversation. He's like, you'll grow way more. You have to go with the mentality of being a learner at these. So, I mean, when you were talking about that, it instantly transported me back to like 20 years in an instant. I'm like, oh man, I remember that was such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you've said a few times, Lena, is you said, I identified this person as a good leader. And so I asked him to mentor me. And you were saying, hey, lots of times people get promoted into management and they're not leading people. Can we, and I probably should ask this at the beginning, but this is where we're at in this time we're going with.
It's fine.
How do you identify what's the difference sort of between, if I'm looking at skill sets and types of people, what would you call the difference between somebody that's a good manager versus a good leader? Are they one and the same? Are there significant differences? Can one person be a good manager and a good leader? Can they be a good manager and a crummy leader? Can they, how do you identify those differences?
Yeah. So do I think someone could be a good manager and not necessarily a good leader? The answer is yes. Meaning, you can support your team, you can be present for your team, you can help your team, but you're not the person that delegates very well. So you micromanage because you don't have a certain level of trust. So you're still in that manager category, right? So for me, a good leader is someone who not only shows up and is the example, but also empowers his or her team to be the best possible team that the team can be, and empowers the team to really show up and share ideas and be innovative and really thrive in their roles. So a manager to me is one who is just doing a lot of tactical things, but they still have opportunities to lean more into the behaviors of a leader. So when I think about a good leader, I touched on empowering your team, but it's also one who has tapped in heavily into having high emotional intelligence. So this is the individual that is highly self-aware. They lead with empathy, right? You could be a good manager, but not always lead with empathy, right? There could be a gap there. But a good leader leads with empathy. They are adaptable. They are resistant. They are resilient. And they understand how to adapt to change and lead their team through change in a way that's positive, in a way that's healthy. Managers sometimes don't always know how to lead their teams through change because they haven't developed the ability they themselves to be adaptable. And so in their own resistance to change, they don't show up as a leader, or they may not agree with a change. And that shows which once again, a good leader, even though they may disagree with a change, they're still going to honor that change and lead their team through the change the best way that they can. So I do think there's a distinction based on some of the things that I mentioned, but I think one of the greatest levels of distinction is a leader truly empowers their team, and the leader is able to create what I like to call psychological safety, where you create an environment where it's not based on fear. People feel safe to share their ideas. They feel safe to make mistakes. Their voice is honored. They feel valued. They feel seen. They feel heard. And many times what I observed was someone may have been an okay manager, but they didn't know how to tap into all of those things that a psychologically safe space offers.
That's a really good definition. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's really well rounded. Couple of things too, as we're getting in here, I always tend to get to this point. I'm going to remind people there's a couple of things. One, if you want to connect with Lena, let me find my banners over here. And I've had this on the screen once or twice. But if you want to connect with Lena on LinkedIn, you can look for Lena M. Wilson. Connect with her that way. On LinkedIn, it's Lena M, middle initial M, Wilson, Wilson. Just if you're listening on the audio podcast, that way you can remember to look that up, or certainly check out her website, lenamwilson.com, for consulting, resources, more speaking, all of the things that she does. So a couple of being a transition coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it very interesting because I think a lot of times people don't realize when they're going through a transition, or people that I've encountered, like what they view it as is instead of like that transition and the opportunity for growth, they view it simply as, and you were saying this earlier, like, some leaders struggle with change. How do I do this? What do I do? And they view, well, change is coming at me. I gotta, keep that out away from me, versus looking at it as, hey, this is a stepping stone and moving. So in that role, when you said earlier, leaders struggle with change, sometimes they don't know how to do it. Sometimes they don't know what to do. There's not clarity. From your experience, why do you think leaders struggle with change more than other people? Do you think like leaders and managers and organizations, maybe somebody, especially if you're an entrepreneur, let's take that stance. So higher level executives, leaders, do you think they struggle with change more or less than the rest of like a staff within a business or whatnot? And if so, why?
I don't know that I would say that they struggle more than individual contributors or, lower level individuals. And what I will say generally, Mike, is I think most people are okay with some degree of change. I think what happens in organizations is that the change comes very quickly, it's very sudden, and oftentimes, unfortunately, it doesn't come with clarity and explanation that helps to put one at ease. And when people don't understand the why behind a very sudden change, then they start to speculate. And in their speculation, we know that our brains are going to always default to worst case scenario. And they start trying to fill in the gaps. And those filling in the gaps can often create the panic and the anxiety and the worry. So I don't think that they necessarily struggle more. I think most people have a challenge with sudden change versus incremental change that's easier to digest. And, the climate that we're in, we're seeing rapid changes without much explanation, right? Which is why when I think about being a good leader and leading your people through change, it's that leader that's able to communicate as frequently as possible. They can't always share all the details, but as much as you can share, that's important, because the less you can, you can create these speculations, and the more you can reduce the worry and the panic, the better. And the way we do that is by over communicating where we can. And it goes back to leading with empathy, right? I think the distinction between maybe a manager and a leader in these situations is that, and I think I said this earlier, sometimes managers are going through their own struggle with the change that they now have to lead people through.
Sure.
And so when you're trying to grasp something that you don't quite understand, that you're struggling with yourself, it's a lot harder to lead others through that, where a leader is able to pause, process, may not agree, but then they're able to say, okay, what's the best way for me to kind of navigate my team through this, and never ever disclose that they don't even agree with the decision or the change that's happening. That's the difference with a leader.
So one of the things that reminds me of a couple. I love the way you put it. You said, like, people got to understand the why. They need clarity. They need explanation. That eliminates the fear and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading a quote one time that says something like, "Change is inevitable. Growth is optional." Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you said it very eloquently, and especially right now, there's so much change, both
Mm-hmm.
in the environment, in
Mm-hmm.
if you live in the US, if you live
Right.
in the world, if there's so much that's
Yeah.
going through. And
Mm-hmm.
so when someone suggests change, one of the other things that reminded me of is there's a Colin Powell quote. I was in my manager's office for years, and then
Mm-hmm.
I posted it, and I won't get this exactly right, but I'll get the idea behind it. Colin
Mm-hmm.
Powell made the statement of something like, "Hey, when we're debating a decision or change,
Mm-hmm.
that debate sharpens me, right? But once we've made a decision, because you've said this several times, you said, hey, leaders will back that, they'll go through with it,
Mm-hmm.
they'll follow through with it." And so he said, hey, this debate sharpens me, but once we've made a decision, I expect you to adopt that decision as if it was your own,
Yeah.
because then you don't have
Mm-hmm.
all the conflict and the ideas and the different
Mm-hmm.
difference of opinions for
Right.
people saying, well, what if we did this? Well, what if we did that? Look, this is the decision we made. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's changed, but we're all headed here. I think for that to be successful is, like you said, you have to communicate frequently, and you got to share the why.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's say, because I know businesses are moving rapidly, and
Mm-hmm.
when change happens, let's say that you get to a point in business that it feels like just everything's changing. The whole world's being turned upside
Mm-hmm.
down, and
Mm-hmm.
there's speculation, there's worry, there's fear, there's anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of, hey, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
If you are the leader,
Mm-hmm.
how do you address that?
So I'm trying. So I have a biased response because I'm a
I'll
transition
take
coach,
any. I'm cool
and
with it. Bring it.
I have like a whole framework. I'll do the shameless plug, right? Because I
Absolutely.
I do coach people through my framework that is called the Transition Blueprint, and it is
Okay.
a 6 pillar framework. And as I explain it, it may sound like a lot, but it's really very seamless once you do it very organically. But it's really just really looking at your mindset, and that's really examining what are your thoughts around the change, and what thoughts might be preventing you from embracing the change, and how can we reframe those thoughts, right? So instead of saying, why is this happening, ask yourself, what can this teach me, or what's the opportunity in this change? So
Mm,
we look at renewing the mindset. The second thing is regulating emotions. That is a big piece, because if we don't manage our emotions, then we start to be reactionary versus responding, and we start to be irrational and not logical. And so the leader has to regulate their emotions, but then the leader also has to take it a step further and make sure that the individual that they are leading is, first of all, expressing their emotions, talking through what they're feeling about the change. I think that's where you lead with empathy, right? I think sometimes we could be so focused on getting to the end result that we ignore the fact that we need to pause and really listen to the heart of what this person's going through, because it is such a big change for them in their world and all the fears that come with that. The other piece is building your resilience, right? Like, you have to learn how to bounce back. Like you just said, change is inevitable. And even though we know that theoretically, people still struggle with it. And so we have to continue to help people to build their resilience and help them to understand this is going to continue to happen, but you are more than capable, right? You are more than, you've demonstrated your ability. The other piece is, sometimes we talked about the why. When the why changes, it may mean a realignment of goals. And this is where clear communication comes in. Because we're going through this change and this transition, goals or our area of focus might also need to shift. And as a good leader, you need to help your individual understand that, hey, we are realigning these goals, and here's why. The other piece is rebuilding confidence. When you're going through a transition or a change, sometimes we lose our confidence along the way because the place that we're going to is unfamiliar, it's unknown. Maybe we haven't developed the right skill or the right level of expertise. And so we need some rebuilding of our confidence. And so the leader is there to reassure the individual that you're going to get the appropriate training, you're going to get the appropriate coaching, we're going to have modules, whatever it takes. Rebuilding confidence in the process is important. And then the last piece is around building momentum. So when an individual, an employee, someone is going through change, it's continuous follow-up to help them sustain the momentum to be successful through that change. And a manager, is sometimes in their own survival mode of navigating that change, that they don't always remember to do the follow-up piece and the check-ins. How are you doing through this change? The person might be performing, but that doesn't mean that they're doing well emotionally or mentally. And so being, intentional about your follow-up and your check-ins and doing the necessary things to help them sustain success through that change. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, it more than answered it. And
Okay.
I'm going to have you, I want to repeat this because you said, okay. And there are no shameless plugs here.
Okay.
Please plug away. I have no issue with that whatsoever. And I encourage people, like, listen, if you are going through a transition in business, if you are going through a transition in life, if you are going through a transition, I mean, again, Lena and I were just chatting a few minutes beforehand, like, she is the go-to. So there's no shameless plug. Bring it. So you said, hey, I've got this transition blueprint and there's 6 pillars.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I missed
want me to summarize it? Because I know I said a lot in between.
Well, and I think I missed the first one. So yeah, give me.
Reframe your mindset.
Okay. Got that.
Regulate your emotions. Rebuild your resilience. Realign your goals if necessary. Reclaim your confidence. And then reignite your momentum.
Got it. So I did. I had all but the first one. So,
okay.
And I love that because I want, if it's okay with you, I'd love to share that in the show notes too. Just say, hey, look, here's the tidbit. Now go check her out, because obviously that goes way deeper than for us to have a 45-minute or hour-long conversation.
Yeah,
right?
It does. Yeah.
But I think it gives you just the taste of, like, when we're talking about that, and I'm saying, hey, how do you, because the question went back to, hey, what happens when you have people that are speculating, when there's worry, when there's anxiety and so forth? You drill down to a process like this, because you can always resort back to what a process is. Like, that's one of the things that I've found in my many years in business and my career is, like, the process, if you default back to whatever the process is, whatever process you adopt, right? If it's a sales process, if it's a transition blueprint process like this, process doesn't have emotions. So you can always weigh things against it, right? Like, hey, when you're saying, okay, do these things, from reframing your mindset. I love the fourth one you said is, and I'm just going to expand on this one for a second, because this is one I struggle with. When the why changes, you have to realign your goals. And it's human nature, and people, you need to hear that, write that down. But that's just one of the 6. I'll put the 6 in the description. But Lena said specifically, when the why changes, you have to realign your goals. And I think so often what happens, human nature, leaders, workers, staff members, family members, spouses, like that stuff, it floods your entire life, because things change over time. We fall in love. And I remember this, I'll just share from my own experience. Like, for example, when I had a podcast prior to this one, it was called The Front, and I loved it. And that was the thing. And it was all about leading from the front, being in front, pushing out front, bringing other people with you out front. The thing that I realized after doing that show for probably 2 years was, when you have to explain what it means right from the get-go, that's not a good start, right? Because people are going, well, what does it mean, and so forth. And so that was one of the things was, well, that, and I wouldn't say it's my whole why, but that idea behind that show, I was so in love with the idea because it was my idea. I just couldn't let it go. And it took somebody else telling me, saying, hey, look, and not that the whole why changed, right? I still want to help grow people and develop people and share their voice and be able to feature people on a show. But fast forward, it took a friend saying, look, people just don't understand it, man. So you need to realign. You have to come up with a different idea, a different set of goals. And I know that's not exactly what you're saying, but it's one of those things when we fall in love with that idea of what our why is or what the goal is.
Yeah.
It's sometimes hard to let go of because it's ours, right?
It's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good example. It's very similar to, when I was, my daughter was younger, I had the opportunity to work from home. And so working from home in corporate was the thing that met my why at that time, because I got to be at home and she was, but then I'm going to be an empty nester next year. And so that why and having to be home with her is no longer there because she's not even going to be here next year, right? And so in that whole journey of reinventing myself, it's like, okay, this would be a good time where you can really flex through entrepreneurship and see how far you can spread your wings. So and I think leaders, the one thing I would say, leaders, I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes they can't share the entire why. I want to be sensitive to that. I know that there are confidentiality things that come up, but you share what you can and you provide reassurance. Sometimes we're so uncomfortable with the change that we avoid those very difficult and hard conversations, which creates more anxiety with your employees. And so if you can get in front of it, that's really the best way to approach it, to alleviate some of that angst that's coming.
Well, and I think to dovetail on what you're talking about, there are simple things that are, even if you can't give the specifics, if you can give the 20,000 foot view to somebody.
Yeah.
But when you are delivering that, and this is a communication piece, I guess, but when you're delivering that to someone, don't deliver it to them in an email or a text. Go when possible, right? And I understand you maybe have a larger organization, but if you're delivering it to a team of managers, they say that people can effectively manage 7 to 8 people. If you're delivering it to that cluster of people, department heads or whatnot, if you're a top level manager, or if you're a middle manager and you're delivering that to your team, I think when possible, as you're talking about this, Lena, like it's important to do the simple things like deliver the information that you can in person and look people in the eyeballs.
Absolutely.
It's become so common that it's like, oh, hey, we've got good news or bad news, or we're headed this direction, or we're doing this or that, whatever. I'm going to send it in an email. And then you think that satisfies it. And people don't hear that. They don't see the emotion behind it. They don't see the trust that they've built up with you. They don't see if your communication is congruent with what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to be willing to be vulnerable in these moments, right? Look, I really don't know the answer to that question. I don't, but as soon as I have it, I'm going to come back to you, and just being honest, because, people need that honesty in tough times.
So one, thank you so far. I got a couple more questions I want to hit on here. We're kind of coming down the backside. A couple of things as a reminder for anybody that may be listening to the audio podcast, you can connect with Lena on LinkedIn. It's Lena M. Wilson, LENA MWILSON. Connect with her on LinkedIn there. Certainly you can check out her website as well, lenamwilson.com. I think you sent me some links of some stuff to share on your website. I'll make sure and include that in the description for the podcast as well.
Yeah, there's a free career guide on there that would be helpful for this podcast. Yes.
Absolutely. So make sure, as you're listening, come back to the show, check the description. I'll have the links there for that. When you are getting into coaching somebody, because I want to get into some of your expertise here when you're talking about transition coaching someone, and you're sitting down with someone for the first time. Where do you start? Do you start with the blueprint, and then do you find that, I know I have a habit of asking like 2 or 3 layered questions, so just roll with me on it.
I'm with you.
Do you find that is there a distinct difference between somebody's business life and their personal life? Or do you also find that those sort of mesh as you're sitting down, you're saying, okay, well, let's talk about this. where do you start? And do you start personal? Do you start business? Do they overlap?
Mhm. So there is an overlap. I actually have a new client tonight. So I always do some type of discovery session in the beginning, a complimentary discovery session, because I want to be clear on what you are wanting or what you're transitioning through.
Hmm.
I also want to understand, what are your roadblocks? What are your challenges? Where do you feel like you're stuck? Because I want to make sure my coaching, while I have the transition blueprint, outside of that blueprint, my coaching, I take pride in saying this, is very personalized to what your challenges are, what your obstacles are, and how I can best help you get the results and the outcome that you were seeking. The discovery session helps me to identify what those are and to really fully confirm that I am able to support you. So that's the discovery session. Once I do that and I have a clear understanding of what we're going to be working through, then I tell you that, hey, this is what it's going to look like. So I have six coaching sessions. I have 12. So it really just depends on which package you decide to choose and how many sessions you want. But then I will break that up, and you generally will get an idea of what we're going to cover. I will include the blueprint as part of my process. However, depending on what's happening, we may need to spend 2 coaching sessions on regulating your emotions because you're really struggling. Or we may need to spend 2 coaching sessions on reframing your mindset because you were just stuck in a place. And we know that when it comes to transition, letting go of the former, letting go of the old, letting go of the familiar is sometimes the hardest piece of moving through to something new and something that can be unfamiliar. So I say that to say that I am going to guide you, but I'm also going to recognize where you might be stuck a little more than you think, and we may spend more time in those areas. And that's where the personalization comes in, so that I make sure that when you complete it, you're still not struggling in those different areas.
That's really good. There's 2 things you said there that I think are excellent. One, you said maybe we'll spend more time and
Mm-hmm.
learning to let go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sounds like homework.
Mm-hmm. It is.
um,
It is. There's
um,
always homework.
because people, I think sometimes it is very easy for people to be on the outside a little more objective. Like if I'm sitting across from you, I have my view of the world that's always going out like this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all I always see the same thing. I always look the same way. I always look to, I'm in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm always looking at Pikes Peak the same, versus
Right.
somebody else that's coming in. One, they may be seeing Pikes Peak for the first time and they go, oh my gosh, this is absolutely amazing. Or they may
Right.
say, hey, when's the last time you went to the top and looked down? And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Sounds like homework, right?
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I think that's really good. Do you find that, because one of the things you said at the onset there was, hey, I make sure people are really clear, clear with expectations, clear with what you're doing and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when you're engaging with people through a transition, that one of the struggles they have through transition is they're just not clear with themselves to begin with?
I have encountered that, but I will say most of the clients that I work with, they generally know what's happening. I just have to unlock the answer that's already in them.
Okay.
And and I say that because it could be fear that's showing up. Like, you already know that you need to do this, but fear is keeping them stuck, but they're not identifying it as fear. Or it could be something that they know they need to let go of, but they haven't built the right level of discipline to let go of that thing. There could be so many pieces. And so I think most people that I've worked with, they kind of know, they have the nudge that it's time to move
Gotcha.
to something new, but there's something that's preventing them from taking that leap. And it could be fear, it could be lack of discipline, it could be lack of training. I mean, I've worked with individuals who are like, it sounds like you might need to go back to school to acquire this skill because you're so
Interesting.
passionate about doing this thing. And so, yeah, it really looks different. But to your point, you can't always see that piece of it, and you need a different perspective to come in to help you identify where you might have that block.
I really love that answer. It's really good. It's
Okay.
just so good. Like because for me, and again, my perspective,
Hmm.
and I don't do what you do, right? That's why I love to lean in on people's experience. I learn so much from having these conversations.
Yeah,
So,
I'm
you know,
sure.
thank you. But like for me, I think, oh, okay, well, maybe it's not clear, but that's probably me imparting my own bias, right? Of, oh,
Right.
well, it's probably this. And you're like, no,
Yeah.
because when you explain that and you sort of reframed it, you're like, no, most
Mhm.
people do know
Mhm.
like they already know this, but they've gotten to this point. They know the thing, it's the nudge over it. If you have
Mhm.
somebody that is fearful, is there a
Mhm.
way that somebody can break through fear, or do you have a whole individual process for that? Or is there something that you would say, hey, look, here's this thing you need to do, that maybe a recurring theme for people that you've coached, that fear was the
Mhm.
underlying issue with them taking the next step? Is there something you would offer as advice?
What I would say is when fear shows up, what I have seen most often is that people just don't have enough belief in themselves. So their belief system is one that is filled with a lot of doubt, or they are leaning too much into past failures, or they could be too concerned about what other people are going to think if they do something that's totally outside of the box. So I usually try to uncover what's creating that fear. We do have to do some work in terms of what's creating the fear. And then once we identify what's creating the fear, it's then, okay, well, let's just say hypothetically, I'm concerned about what people are going to think if I leave my six-figure job and I start my own business, right? I'll use myself as an example. So
Sure.
tell me, why do you care? Why do you care about that? So we're gonna go that, like, tell me, why do you care? And so they tell me, a lot of times they freeze, right? And then they come up with some answer. And then we go deeper. Why is that so important to you? And so in some cases, it's because they struggle with rejection. And so the thought of people not embracing or accepting something major that they're going to do in their life really scares them to the point that they just don't move at all. So I don't have like one necessarily defined process, but I will say fear shows up in a lot of different ways. It could be procrastination, it could be self doubt. And so I need to get to the root of what's creating that fear. And then we deal with the root of that, right? Not just the symptom of it, but we get to the root of what's creating the fear and we work through that. And
So good.
that's what creates sometimes, like, so we may go into a session and we're like, okay, we're talking about resilience today, and then I start digging deeper and I'm like, nope, something new has surfaced, we need to deal with the something new, and so next week we have to continue with the theme of resilience. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, it shows too, as a transition coach, that, you know, just one of the things that I'm hearing you say is, don't fall so in love with your plan. You got to be able to be flexible.
Absolutely.
So love
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
So, we're at the tail end here. So if you would, I'm going to give you a minute. Don't go anywhere, but I am going to ask you for any final thoughts to take us out. But before I do that, I
Okay.
will remind everybody again, if you are, whether you're watching whatever platform you might be watching on, YouTube or Spotify, or if you're listening on Apple or Amazon or any of the podcast platforms, if you want to connect with Lena, there's a couple of ways. I've had her LinkedIn here on the screen a few times. Certainly, she's on LinkedIn. You can check out her website, lenamwilson.com. I will also have links in the description for the podcast if you're interested in downloading. She's got a couple of resources. One of them you said was a career guide.
There's a free career transition guide, and then there's another free guide, 6 tips on how to navigate change in your
Okay.
life. Hmm.
So definitely, I would encourage you to check that out. And with that, Lena, any final thoughts? Any just final things that you'd like to share to take us out today?
So I have a couple thoughts. So the first thought is, you always have an opportunity to become a better leader. So if anyone's listening and you feel like, man, I have so many opportunities to grow based on what I heard today, you still want to exercise a lot and practice a lot of self-compassion, because you still have the ability to learn and grow. So don't beat yourself up. Just be committed to becoming a better leader, becoming a better manager. I said this earlier, but I do want to underscore this because I think it's an important piece. Getting feedback from your team, regularly, and listening to that feedback is so important to your growth and development as a leader. And I know sometimes hearing hard or what might feel like a criticism could be a little bit hard to digest, but you want to make sure that you're operating from a place where this is going to help me grow. This is going to help me become a better leader. And then the last thing I would say is, Mike said it best, right? Change is inevitable in life. We're all going to navigate change in our personal lives, at work, in business. It's always going to show up. And you really do want to practice having a mindset that embraces change and really trying to find the opportunities in the changes that you experience, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if you're not sure what the path ahead looks like. Embrace the change, especially if you don't have control over changing what's happening. You want to embrace it, and then you want to find opportunities. How can I grow through this? Or what's the opportunity for me to become better, or to move into something different, or to really showcase a skill or develop a skill? So change, while it can be difficult, letting go of the old to embrace the new, it is part of the life that we live. And the people that are able to embrace change are usually the people that are able to rise and soar and take more risks that ultimately give them more meaningful and fulfilling lives.
So good. And thank you so much for sharing all of that, Lena. Just
My pleasure.
absolutely phenomenal. I will tell you, one of my takeaway, I meant to come back to the feedback piece. I had it written down. I'll have to have you on another show for sure.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be back.
And I will tell you, one of the strong takeaways I took from today was this question.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, what can this teach me?
Mm-hmm.
You said it more than once. And I would encourage people, write that down also. Like, what can this teach me? What's this experience? What can this teach me? So that's a good reminder for myself too. So Lena, thank you so much for joining me on the Leadership Toolkit today. If you would hang out for just a moment while I take us out.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Lena M. Wilson. Absolutely phenomenal. And so if you're going through some stuff, even if you're not going through some stuff, if you're the one that's making people go through stuff, I would say reach out to her for that too, because how can you better communicate? How can you better coach? How can you better lead people going through that? But certainly as you may be transitioning in business or in life, Lena, she's got to be your go-to. She will be mine. She's absolutely just awesome. I've said it earlier. I always enjoy the opportunity and what I can learn from the conversations that I have. And I hope that you feel as blessed as I do as you're listening to this show. So do me a favor, folks, as you are listening or watching the show here, one of the things that helps is if you would please share the show. Share it, throw some thumbs up on it. That's one of the things we trigger the algorithm, especially on YouTube, but on every platform. If you've got something to say, throw it in the comments, say it, put the thumbs up on it, and do those sorts of things, because that's one way that we can continue to get the word out and help the show grow more. And most importantly, and the reason that I started the show, the reason that I'm so passionate about it and love it, and I love each and every one of you, the people that I get to interact with every week. If you know somebody that needs to hear the message from the show today, share it with them specifically. And, be kind, be graceful, but like, hey, you got to listen to this, because we all know someone that's probably going through some transitions in life right now. Lena might be the fit. Like, you've got to go listen to this gal because she's just awesome. The stuff that she shared today. So I encourage you, share that with them, because that's the whole theme is, right, how do you grow yourself? And also, how do you grow the people around you? So thank you, everybody, for tuning into the Leadership Toolkit today. And until we speak next, stay great. We'll talk soon, everyone.